if I get suggestions, I have no time to make sure that that could happen, so I had to use my own suggestion that I was already working towards. But I do appreciate the suggestions. So if you have things that you would like to study in our class, let me know now so that I can be thinking about them in the future, and I can kind of chart it a little bit and have ideas about where I might be heading in terms of our studies. But I really just didn't give you enough time to really give me any suggestions that we could do by next Wednesday, and so we'll have to stick to kind of the way I was thinking. And where I want to go next, and just to give you a quick thought about that, is that we've been studying the Psalms, which are kind of David's poems. They're songs that he writes, and you kind of get this imagery of God and the praising of God, and this message of how wonderful and secure and protecting that God is through these psalms that David writes. And so I thought it might be good to maybe turn our attention in a similar vein, but just slightly different, and look at the wisdom of God as explored in the book of Ecclesiastes. So that's where I want to head next. I want to move from this poetic side to the wisdom side, if you will, in a discussion of God's knowledge for us. So we're heading to Ecclesiastes. Probably next Wednesday is when we'll do that. Most likely we'll finish up Psalm 63 tonight. And if you want the questions for the book of Ecclesiastes, it gets crowded back there with people coming and going in the foyer area, and so I've decided to move all the things that I offer you to the table back here by this window. And so you can go back here to the table by the window tonight on your way out and pick up the list of questions for the book of Ecclesiastes, and that'll allow for a little more free-flowing of folks coming in and leaving the building back in the foyer area. And so those materials are back there on that table, back by the sound room, and you can pick up a copy of the questions for the entire book of Ecclesiastes on that table. And I'll remind you now that that's the whole set. What you'll find in the bin as you come and go are just whatever we're on that night, so that if there's a visitor or if somebody happens to forget their packet at home, they can grab that. So that won't be anything new in that bin back there in the foyer. It'll only be for that particular night in case there's a visitor or somebody that needs that night's lesson as they come in the door. So the bulk of the material will be back on this table in the back of the foyer. Okay, Psalm 63 as we continue and conclude our study. And again, we have not been dealing with every single psalm that comes along. We've been dealing with a handful of David's psalms and trying to just get some imagery about how the psalms worked and the importance of them in sharing with us David's very personal connection with God. This particular psalm finds herself most likely in kind of the same time period as our prior psalm, at kind of the moment where Absalom has been pursuing. Absalom, by the way, is whom? David's son. Absalom decides he wants to be king. Does he gain some ability to kind of almost make that happen? Yeah, he gets a pretty good following. He's been wooing the people for a long period of time, rendering judgments that have kind of appeased the people a little bit. And he would even say, oh, if I were the judge over Israel, your case would be heard and your case would be rendered right, and all the things. And the text says in 1 Samuel that he did what in that process, or 2 Samuel? He stole the hearts of the people. That's the same time frame. Absalom's going to pursue David. David flees out of Jerusalem with some folks. Ultimately, Absalom dies in battle, and King David has to deal with all of those things. That's probably the same time period that we're dealing with when he writes this song. In fact, there's the very first question in your lesson sheet asks this: what evidence is there in this psalm that suggests a later rather than earlier date? What is there that suggests that? That's right. In verse 11 of the psalm, David refers to himself as what? As king, right? As the king. If he's referring to himself as the king, this is not the time where he's hiding in the wilderness during whose pursuit? Saul. Can't be that, because he wasn't king at that time. And so if he refers to himself in verse 11 as king, then most likely we're dealing with when he's being pursued by Absalom and he has to flee Jerusalem into the wilderness to try to escape that. That's why we generally frame this psalm at the latter end of David's reign, not here at the beginning or during the days of Saul. And that's why the general conclusion is made concerning that. And so with those thoughts, let's read together, as been our pattern. Let's read the whole psalm, and let's go back then after that and talk about it and what we learned from it. Psalm 63, a psalm of David, when he was in the wilderness of Judah. O God, Thou art my God. Earnestly will I seek Thee. My soul thirsteth for Thee. My flesh longeth for Thee in a dry and weary land where no water is. So have I looked upon Thee in the sanctuary to see Thy power and Thy glory. Because Thy loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise Thee. So will I bless Thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in Thy name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise Thee with joyful lips. When I remember Thee upon my bed and meditate on Thee in the night watches. For Thou hast been my help, and in the shadow of Thy wings will I rejoice. My soul followeth hard after Thee. Thy right hand upholdeth me. That those that seek my soul to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for foxes. But the king shall rejoice in God. Every one that sweareth by Him shall glory, for the mouth of them that speak lies shall be stopped. And King David writes this very powerful psalm in the midst of all that challenge with Absalom. And he reminds us once again that God has been what through all of these difficulties? With him, and in particular a protector, a shield, a guide, one who gives him strength when strength can't seem to be found anyplace else. And the beauty of these Psalms, as we try to remind ourselves throughout our study, is not just that these thoughts were directly benefiting David, but they benefit whom as well? Us, right? As you read these Psalms, place yourself in them. We may not have the ability to pen the poetic beauty of David's Psalms, but we can personalize them in the sense that God protects me. God protects you. He strengthens me. It's very personal. One of the greatest failures that many of us as God's children have is that we never personalize our relationship with Him. God is somebody that we come and sing about or talk about on Sundays or Wednesdays. God is a figure to us that we have a very generic connection to, and we never spend time personalizing it. You know, you ask yourself maybe the question, at least I have as I've been studying through all these different Psalms of David, how does David reach a point where he can pen these words? To what extent is it, or what is it special about David that allows for him to write such beauty and yet such strong and powerful statements? And I keep coming back to the fact that David's relationship with God was real. It was very personal. It was very specific. It had meaning and purpose. And therefore he pens these words for our benefit as well. You and I are strengthened by a personal relationship with God. And I don't say that in any kind of charismatic or but just in a very real way. And sometimes we try to approach a relationship with God in a superficial way. Had people done that before? The history of the Israelites is filled with issues in history of where they tried to superficially draw a connection with God. In fact, they were warned on several occasions, I don't want another feast, I don't want another holy day, I don't want another sacrifice, I don't want any of that anymore. What I want is you. And so we benefit from the Psalms of David when we'll spend time personalizing, as David did, our relationship with God. Right. Right. Guide them in their life or something. Sure. And it seems like people are a little more connected. Yeah. And I agree with that. And that was actually something I was thinking about this afternoon as I was reading through that and drawing some of these same thoughts, that you might even say, in one sense, that David has an edge over us in being able to personalize his relationship with God because of this very direct interaction that he has with God. Of direct communication in many senses. There's a very specific role that David has that is going to have God behind it. And so I absolutely agree that there are things that help David draw a very real and very personalized connection with God due to his circumstances. And the one thought, though, that I had in connection with that was, in my own personal study, was that who's the great equalizer in that for us that David didn't have? Christ. Jesus is the equalizer in that, in some sense. And I'm not, but we have the Son of God. David could only do what with the Son of God? Look forward to Him, right? He could look out. And you look ahead to that coming Savior. We live in the fulfillment of Jesus. And so David drew nigh unto God in a very direct way. We draw nigh unto God through Christ. And so certainly circumstances and abilities are different. And whether more challenged or less challenged, there's still a great need for us to personalize as best we can our connection to the Savior and ultimately to the Father by that. Right. And maybe right. And Judy, you might be on to something. That maybe our problem is that we want what David had, and that is this very specific, purposeful, direct connection with God, and we don't want to be content with trying to connect to God through this. And that's the hard part, is that our ability to connect to God comes via the message that's revealed in the book. David had the very specific kind of ability to connect with God, and it makes it our circumstance different and more challenged, maybe in some senses. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Through the Word. Absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead, Kevin.
Therefore, brethren, since we have confidence to enter the holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which He inaugurated for us through the veil, that is His flesh. Since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a sincere heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed in pure water. We can have that personal relationship. We have better access, as the Hebrew writer tells us, things are better through Jesus. And we can have that personal access to God as David did if we will avail ourselves of it.
Yeah, right. Through the ultimate high priest, which is Jesus. Yeah, and that's true. And we man over time, and I think Jack's thoughts are accurate in that sense that man over time has made it more difficult because we have moved further away from God. And because of that, it has challenged us. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's okay then. Yeah, and it does make it difficult. And that's part of this challenge that we have. And the challenge of all that is that we have to be careful we don't adopt that attitude. That we don't just follow the pattern and say, well, everybody's disconnecting from God, so that must be the thing to do. The challenge for us is to overcome that battle and persevere on. Yeah. Is right and beneficial, and yeah, that's right. And it gets us where we need to be. Yep. So how then does David describe his yearning for God? Okay, my soul thirsteth for thee, my flesh longeth for thee. And in what place? In a dry and weary land. And the writer of the worksheets, and again, these aren't mine, the writer of the worksheet asks a very, a very poignant question at the end of question 2. And I won't necessarily ask you to answer that out loud, but I hope you thought about it. And that is, have you ever felt that way? Have you or I ever felt that kind of compelling movement towards God, where I thirst, I long, I recognize that I am in a dry and thirsty land? Sounds like a song. Twice. It's a psalm, and it's a song we sing. A dry and thirsty land. That we search for refreshing from God, and that we long for that, and we thirst for it. Jesus said it in what way in the Beatitudes? Blessed are they who hunger and thirst after righteousness. That's the same imagery that David's sharing here. David is willing to say, I hunger, I thirst, I long for the benefits of God. Have I ever felt that way? You and I have to answer that on our own. And then David turns his attention. Where did he say he saw the evidence of God's power? And what do you think he means by that? Verse 2 of the Psalm. So have I looked upon thee in the sanctuary to see thy glory and power. Okay. That's right. That's where they could connect to God. In the ark of the covenant, the promises of God, the tremendous connection they have, remembering that what isn't built? Temple's not built, right? So we don't have the temple as the central location yet. That doesn't happen until Solomon. We've got the sanctuary, the tabernacle, in order to go and to draw, and the Israelites could get connected to God. So what's the implication of that then? Second part of the question. What's the implication, you think? Okay. Okay. He saw the benefits of coming into that direct connection with God. What else? What you think about it? What did he see there? He said he saw something. We've already answered it, but I want you to get that imagery. I saw the glory and power of God in His holy place, in His sanctuary. Generally what happens there is worship. So the glory and power of God is revealed in worship. Isn't that an interesting connection? I don't know about you, but that's what I saw when I read that. Quote it, Tom. Yeah, that's right. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And David has said in other psalms his recognition of the benefits of being in the presence of God. And what I want us to appreciate is that David says something to me that is very important, and that is that he recognized that God's power and glory was revealed not just when he conquered some army somewhere, not just when he was able to shield David from some treachery, not just when David was able to escape from some cave somewhere, but that David said, I saw it revealed when I came before God in worship. When we worship, whose presence are we in? Presence of God. That even from the times of David, moving forward even in New Testament times, where we should view the glory and power and witness the glory and power of God in the midst of worship to Him. Think about that. We live in a society that loves to hero worship. We pick our favorites and we cheer and we applaud and we practically bow down on bended knee before the best athletes, the best actors, the best politicians, whoever it might be that has drawn the interest of the people. We do a lot of hero worshiping. And you say to ourselves, we even say sometimes, why does that guy have so much what? Power and influence. How'd that guy get there? Just because he can dribble a basketball? Just because he's good on the TV screen? Just because he's able to convince folks to vote for him? That he wields power and influence because of that? But we recognize that people who are able to draw men collectively together generally have some level of power and influence. Here's my point. Yeah, right, for men. People across the globe come into the presence of God to worship Him on a regular basis. And it reveals to us a sense of power and majesty and influence that God still has. We need to reestablish the importance of collective worship. David would go to the sanctuary to worship, where God's people gathered together to worship. We need to start putting a premium back on gathering together to worship God and letting that collective action reveal to us the glory and power of that God. People live in times now where we've become more and more disinterested. More and more people say, why do I need to go to a worship assembly of any kind? I'll honor God in my own way. But when they do that, they may convince themselves that that's real to them. But they are missing out, according to David's psalm, they are missing out on the genuine glory and power of God. When you neglect worship, you're missing out on an opportunity to witness the glory and power of God in action. And that's something that we've got to impress upon our own minds first and try to impress upon others' minds as well. That when you miss worship, you're not just becoming a burden to the church. It's not all those things that we tend to thrust upon that. When you miss worship, you're missing an opportunity to come in and witness the glory and power of God in action. Let's go in the house of the Lord. Sure. Go ahead, Gary. Yeah, worship is much more personal than it is collective. The collective action happens when people blend their hearts together in pure worship to God, and that's where the real strength comes from. But we, yeah, and he let's think one step further with David here for a moment. He pens all of these psalms for people to do what with them? Worship God with them. He's not only interested in that in his own personal way, but David is also interested enough in that others can worship that he writes these psalms so that they can praise God and so they can worship God. He understands the importance of it. And we would do well to do the same. Yeah. And that's why... Sure. We're well after, if we're doing with a later time. And if you recall, David, if you remember when we read 2 Samuel 15 and 18, they were going to move it with David. And if you recall, he told Zadok the priest, he said, no, the ark's going to stay, and you're going to go back and stay in Jerusalem with it. Most likely because David remembered what happened last time, when these events occurred. And so I think that we're dealing with after that incident in connection to that. Yeah, in the proper way. Absolutely. Okay, so what's then David say is better than life? Loving kindness. Whose loving kindness? God, because thy loving kindness is better than life. What kind of benefit is that kind of statement? Okay. Life doesn't always pan out the way we would hope. You think about David just in a personal way. And David tells his men, what are they supposed to do if they come encounter Absalom? What are they supposed to do? Right, leave it gently. Deal with him gently. And what do they end up doing? Threw 3 darts through his heart. 10 men jump in and slay him instead. Now, this is the heartache of David in the midst of all these challenges that he's dealing with. Life hasn't always been good to David. His well-being has been in danger. He's been challenged in many ways. Life hasn't always been good to David. But David knows this one basic fact that gets him through it, and that is that if I had to choose between what men would call a quality life and having the loving kindness of God, which would David choose? He's going to choose the loving kindness of God. The loving kindness of God is superior to any kind of quality of life that you could describe on God's earth. No matter what men think would make for a better life for themselves and how their lives would improve with this or that or the other, what David recognizes is important for all of us. That God's loving kindness is superior to all that. That I would rather have that at my side, the care and love and concern of a caring, kind God, than to whatever benefit of life that men can provide. That's not always easy to convince ourselves of, because life can get pretty tough sometimes. But I appreciate the sentiment of David. If I'm going to make a choice, I'll choose God's loving kindness. That's right. He doesn't know which way all of this is going to pan out, and the challenges that he's under with Absalom. Right. And other statements similar to that. I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of God than to do 1,000 other things. One moment with God's better than 1,000 doing any other. There's sentiment like that throughout the Psalms that help benefit our understanding of those facts. So when and where then did David go to refresh his spirit with thoughts of Jehovah? You have to skip ahead a little bit. That's right. In verse 6 he says, when I remember thee upon my bed and meditate on thee in the night watches. Anybody ever have a sleepless night? Anybody ever have more than one in a row? Anybody been having that for the last month? I was trying to whittle that down, but unfortunately, apparently I can't even get it. It's hard sometimes. I don't mean this in an intelligent way. I mean this in just a factual way. I'm one of those kind of people. I have a tough time shutting my mind off. That doesn't mean I'm smart. In fact, it probably shows a lack of intelligence that I have an inability sometimes to turn the switch. I'm continually processing things, trying to figure out certain things. If I made the right decisions, is this the right choice? Are we doing the right thing? And some people don't have that problem. Some people pillow their head and whoop, they're out. It doesn't, but some. So David says I've had some sleepless nights when I've laid awake in my bed, when the night watches are out late, in the darkest hours of the night. David says that I've found benefit in remembering God in those moments. The truth is that most of our sleepless nights are because we're worrying about something that we can't control. Most of our sleepless nights are because we're laying there awake trying to resolve and fix something that we couldn't fix to begin with. I know I'm guilty of that. I'm trying to resolve things and that are out of my... What David says is better than that is when he gets that way, who's he focus on? God. Because the truth of the matter is that if I'm laying there worrying and becoming anxious over things, especially things that I can't change or control anyway, is that a sign of faith or a lack of faith? That's the truth. The truth is that's a lack of faith. And maybe what I need to do, and I say that literally, what I need to do is stop that process and start filling my mind with the loving kindness and strength of Jehovah. And let Him be real to me as He was to David. Our minds race sometimes. We're hard to capture every thought like we'd like. In fact, the New Testament writer says, take every thought captive to whom? Jesus. And so David says, when I lay awake at night, I try to focus on God. The night watches, when I can't sleep, warm milk ain't helping, and I've seen the last infomercial that I ever want to see the rest of my life. Well, David didn't quite have those, but he says, I get my brain on God. I get my mind on better things. I put my mind at ease by remembering the Creator. That's a great lesson that someday I hope to learn. That I hope to be able to better engage that in my own life. Go ahead, Bob. Yeah. Yeah. And there were plenty of things that he had witnessed through the glory and power of God that he could focus on. There was plenty of it there. And the truth of the matter is there's plenty of it in our lives too. And we just have to make a choice to focus there rather than on all the challenge. Any other thoughts? He makes a statement then about what does the shadow of the wings of God refer to. What's that? What's he talking about? Protection. That's a general idea of just protection in the shadow of the wings of God. And why would he rejoice there? You're safe. It's really that simple, isn't it? That's where safety can be found. Under the wings of God, I find safety and security. And so in the shadow of the wings will I rejoice in those moments. My soul followeth hard after thee. What's he say then next? My right hand upholdeth thee. Why thy right hand upholdeth thee? That's right. Got any lefties in the room? Wow. See that? I don't see any hands. Oh, there's one or two. Okay, well, I wasn't looking over that way. I should have known you were left-handed, Bonnie. I didn't. But you're rare. It is generally understood historically that the right hand and right arm of any person is stronger than their left, because the right hand is the one that does all the work. And so generally speaking, now I realize everybody can come and show me some exception, but generally speaking, historically it is understood that the right hand and arm of any person is stronger than the left because it's the one generally doing the heaviest work. That's why throughout the Bible and throughout other literature, the concept of somebody's right hand is used to demonstrate power and strength. There's a reason behind it. It's not just generic. The reason it's used to reference power and strength is because historically, it is the stronger hand. It is the strong. So David says, I don't have the left hand of God, the lesser strength of God. I have the ultimate strength of God with me. The right hand of God holds me up. The strong hand of the Lord is keeping me steadfast. And what's happening to those who are challenging? Challenging not only David, but who oppose God Himself in some senses. What happens to them? Okay, those that seek my soul to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. What do you think he means by the lower parts of the earth? Okay, it could be death. Okay, it could be death. Anybody have anything else? Yeah, we'll see. We'll talk about them before we're done here. Yeah, we'll get them before we're done here. But so it could be death. What else could it mean? Okay, lower parts of the earth. I mean, their power is going to be destroyed and done away with it. Okay. Okay. In some mythological uses of that. So with that line of thought, what could it mean biblically? Hell. Okay, hell, Hades. There's a place, death, Hades, hell. These folks that have been in opposition to David and in opposition to God by so doing, and find themselves in the lower parts of the earth. Condemnation, ultimately, that those who oppose God find themselves in judgment. Which is that Hebrew word that, basically you see three words. You see Sheol, you see Hades, you see hell, you see, or Gehenna. You see these three different words, all sometimes used in connection to and rendered or translated hell on many occasions. But here's this imagery. Eventually they lose. That's the point. Eventually God's judgment comes forth and they're challenged. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for the foxes in verse 10 in the American Standard Version. Number one, let's take on that sword part first. What's going to happen with people who conduct themselves this way? Okay, they'll become powerless. If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Okay, that imagery is found, I believe, in what David says here. That eventually they turn their swords on themselves. David says God brings a judgment that actually has people given over to the power of the sword. The very thing that they were trying to wield, using the sword and violence towards others, gets turned against them. And they've lived by that sword and shall die by that same sword. They shall be given a portion with the foxes. Tom already mentioned this a few moments ago. You may not have been able to hear him, but some believe that this word fox that is found here also, not to confuse Bible class teachers here for a minute, but it's the same word used in relationship to Samson when he ties the foxes' tails together and lights them on fire and sends them scattering. That they probably may have more in mind of what they call a jackal rather than a fox. We think of a fox in different senses, and just food for thought. That the word that's translated fox here and there is probably referring to more of a jackal-like animal, because especially in this imagery, they shall be a portion for foxes. Foxes generally don't turn on their own flesh like a jackal would. They generally don't have, but jackals will. They are carnivorous. They'll feast on whatever flesh is made available to them. And so the imagery of David's psalm here seems to fit that more than our traditional view of a fox. And so these folks turn sword against sword. They will devour one another and consume one another in the process. Those were dogs, I believe, is what the text says. I don't think it's the same word used there. Yeah, the language is reminiscent. Yeah, but I don't think it's the same word, though, in terms of what's rendered dogs there. Go ahead, Kevin.
Like left out on the battlefield,
yeah.
And the jackals are going to come and eat them.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tom. I thought I heard a voice. I'm sorry. Okay. So yeah, their destruction is not pretty. They turn their swords against each other. Their bodies are left to be consumed by the jackals at a later point. The imagery of the destruction that comes to those who have been in opposition to David and ultimately to God is not pretty. Yes. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, yeah. And so that imagery isn't pleasant. Yeah, yeah. Sure. Any other? Yeah, part of it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That it's a symbol that's been seen. So then, what does David believe will be the outcome of his trial? They say, but the king shall rejoice in God. Every one that sweareth by him shall glory, for the mouth of them that speak lies shall be stopped. If I trust in the loving kindness of God, if I trust in the shadow of God's wings, if I will allow myself to rest in the security of Jehovah, victory will come. Patience, yes. Happen on my time? No. But if I'll rely upon Jehovah, if I'll trust in Him, then He'll secure me, and victory ultimately can come. So if you were going to summarize this particular psalm, what would you say? Yeah. Okay, victory's coming in relationship to over evil and things that harm us spiritually. What else? That's right. Rely on God. He carries us if we'll let Him. What else did you see? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that God can protect those who will attach themselves to Him, and the same God has the power to destroy those who oppose Him. My mind kept going back to that loving kindness of God is better than ease of life. Um, we tend to focus on trying to make our lives easier, and maybe we should spend more time focusing on trying to make our lives more dedicated to God. And then I thought about that shadow of His wings and the protection that God provides and the security of that feeling. Yeah, yeah. There's a very we have seen it over and over again. There's a great beauty in David's expressions of love for God and his longings for Him, and how David recognizes that his life is improved by this relationship with God. And we've seen it numerous times in our studies. Yeah, who can be against? Yeah. And if we genuinely believe that these things are written for our benefit, that these are recorded to benefit us, then what's the lesson? The lesson is David's not an anomaly. That we can gain the same strength and comfort with a God who can't go wrong with.
It's a God who wants to
Yeah,
comfort us,
yeah,
who wants to protect us. And when you thought about that, I thought about Jesus. At the end of His life, He was saying to people of Jerusalem, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I wanted to gather you to myself as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings."
yeah,
God wants to God wants to be our protector and our refuge, but we have to allow Him to.
And Kevin, the beauty of that too is that David pens these things so that the people would come back year after year after year and sing these songs to remind them of that fact. We assemble on regular basis, come in to worship God, and our songs even remind us of those facts as well, that God wants to extend this care and concern for us. It's up to us to choose to embrace it. And that's maybe an underlining theme throughout all of these Psalms that we've studied. Okay, we weren't able to cover every aspect of all the Psalms, obviously, but we'd have been on the subject for a long, long time. So hopefully we've done enough over the past couple of months to give us a good imagery of how the Psalms work and the beauty of them and the empowering aspects of them, and just to appreciate David's work in writing those Psalms. And again, the study will move to Ecclesiastes, Lord willing, next Wednesday, and those materials are back on that table back in the back of the building. You can grab those as you leave, and I'll have a link up on the site sometime this week for that as well. What I'm offering you actually are the questions of a series that Mark Copeland had put together on Ecclesiastes. I chose not to give you the whole series because I wanted the liberty to go in directions that I wanted to go in the class. I didn't want to be kind of beholden to his material, but his questions are good on each chapter. And so that's what I'm giving you back there. And I'll give you a link on the site if you want to see the whole series, then I can give you that and you can look at that as well. But I'm just using basically his questions on his series on Ecclesiastes.